So we're good. So my name's Ray. This is the Building Apps with Ember talk. If you thought you were someplace else, please, feel free to leave. I won't be offended. I'm Ray Tiley, pretty much at everywhere: Gmail, Twitter, GitHub, IRC. So feel free to find me. I'm super nervous right now. So my wife said, imagine you're talking to this guy. He's my 14-month-old son. I think he's really cute, so hopefully he calms me down a bit. So Ember is a framework for building ambitious applications, but this is a little talk. So we're not going to nearly cover everything in Ember. We're just going to go over the basic building blocks that you're going to reuse over and over again to build your Ember application. And so hopefully after this, you'll kind of leave here and you'll kind of see how the patterns go together, and then be willing to dive in, read the guides, which are awesome, which were mostly written by that guy. And then you can kind of blame that guy if you don't like the docs. So this is some of the stuff we're going to cover. The Ember object model, router, templates, routes, models, controllers. Hopefully it will make more sense as we go along. So Ember is magic. So if you were at Steph's talk, this might seem kind of familiar, but this is like basically the simplest Ember app you can write. So you can see we have an Ember application create. And then in our template, which is kind of hard to see, we just have in our application template an outlet. In the index template, we have a mustache that we're printing out the name here, and then we have an input helper, which just gives us an input text box, and we're binding the value of that to the same property. So if I start typing here, so I can type there, it automatically updates all through data binding. That's really cool. But realistically, your app isn't going to do that. So there must be a lot more stuff to Ember that makes it cool. But basically how Ember works is, it's an MVC-ish framework. URLs are very important to Ember, and we'll get into that in a bit. All the magic stuff that just happened works by data binding, and it uses the handlebar templating language. So that's kind of Ember, very high level. So the first thing I want to do is I want to get some FUD about Ember out of the way. These are the things: documentation, testing, stability, performance, that most people write off Ember right away because they've heard bad things about this. So let's just get this out of the way real quick. So documentation, like I said, is really good. There's a lot of good guides. I highly recommend reading through them. Back when I started Ember, these were just coming around, and I feel like they really helped. If you tried to start Ember before the 1.0 days and you just got totally lost, please try it again. Check out the guides because they're really good. So testing, Ember is the only testing framework I know that gives you your application running in a little corner that you can interact with while you're testing it. It has lots of great helpers to manage asynchrony in your tests. And we might get a chance to go over some testing, but there's a lot of really good testing support baked into Ember. So the fact the myths that you can't test your Ember apps aren't there. Stability, Ember actually has a Chrome-like release cycle. So at any given time, there's a canary, a beta, and an actual release of Ember. And at my company, we actually are using the canary build quite often because we like some of the new features. I get some work time to actually work on some of those new features. So I like to use them. But if stability is more your thing, stick to the release channel. If you only want to work on stuff that you know is going to be in the release channel eventually, use the beta build. So stability is, in our opinion, has been a really good thing with Ember. They are very conscious about breaking APIs, as they use semantic versioning, so they pretty much don't break your APIs usually. So that's been really good for us. So performance. The performance thing is actually kind of real. If you've been following Ember at all, you've heard a lot about HTML bars. HTML bars will save us. But HTML bar still isn't there. So it's actually a real thing. But there are things coming, and there's things already there. HTML bars is going to help some of the performance. List view already helps some of the performance stuff now. The run loop is really great at solving performance problems. We're using that in our app to solve some of our performance issues. But really, when you hit a performance issue, and I think this applies to really any of the frameworks, is you kind of need to reevaluate what you're doing, because a lot of times what you're doing is wrong. So we had an issue where we were trying to present 10,000 things in one big long list to the user. And the page would time out. And no matter what framework we tried, the page would time out. It just was a bad UI. It was a bad decision. So we reevaluated it. We came up with a better UI. It was better for the users. It was better for performance. So there are some performance things, especially rendering really long lists. I think that's like the biggest complaint you hear about Ember is like it can't render 10,000 things at once. I would argue that you need to reevaluate that a bit. But there are things like the list view and the run loop and HTML bars eventually, which will kind of help with that stuff. So there is a problem there, but it's quickly going away. All right, so one thing my boss said when I kind of gave a run through is I need to take breaks and pause and drink a little water. So moving on. So why did we choose EMBER.JS where I work? Well, there's really two reasons: conventions and structure. So Ember provides us with a lot of conventions and a lot of structure. It's really opinionated about a lot of things. And I actually see that as a huge value in my day-to-day life. So micro frameworks are kind of all the rage, Yes, I can build awesome things by like taking every little micro library and putting them together myself. But I can also take something that's made to build a Millennium Falcon and I get a better product, I think. And at the end of the day, we're all just using JavaScript. It's still Legos. You can just, bolt shit onto that and it works. So, but for the 80% case, I kind of like the Ember framework really guiding me in the direction 80% of the time. And that's a big win for us. Kind of one more word on that. What I notice is that, it's really easy for me to pick up an Ember app where I left off 2 months ago. We had a big Backbone project. I think Backbone's an awesome framework, but we had a big project. It failed spectacularly. And that's because every time I tried to get back into it, I'd have read a new blog post or I'd learn how to do things differently, and I had to go and rewrite all my Backbone code again. I just got stuck in this loop of doing that, and I haven't had to do that with Ember because it kind of guides me in such a way that I kind of know where to put all my stuff. So let's go through that real quick. So Ember CLI, it's the tooling you would use to create a new Ember app, or at least one of the tools you could use. We're just going to browse kind of what you would get if you ran these commands real quick. So like I say, conventions and structure in Ember aren't just about the code that you actually write. It's more about where you put that code, how you put it together. So I'm going to put this up on the Midwest.js site eventually, probably later today. But basically, this is what you would get if you did a brand new Ember app. And then inside of it, in all the folders, I kind of put a link in the guide to where that stuff is, and then kind of gave an example of what that structure looks like. I'm not going to go over all of them right now because we're going to get to a lot of them in the rest of the talk. So, but this will be up on the Midwest.js site later today. All right, I don't need water yet. All right, so the Ember object model. This is a great slide by Brian Carsadella that kind of shows how the Ember object model and all its kind of derivatives, how they work in Ember. And you can see there's a lot of things that derive directly from Ember object model, Ember.object. And so this is essentially how it works. We can extend Ember object and create our own object. We can just define some properties on those. And then Ember uses heavily computed properties. And all a computed property is it saying this function, you can see right here, I don't know where my mouse is. You can see right here, we're just extending a function. Ember extends the prototype of it. And we're saying the value of this function is going to change if any of these keys, like these ones up here, change. And I'm just going to return the full name from that function. And what's cool is when I change the first or last name, Ember, through its data binding, is automatically going to change the full name for me wherever I'm using it. If I had to do this in jQuery, I would have to know that, when I change a property, I have to find all the places in my DOM that I'm using that and set inner HTML to change them. And then when I use that property somewhere else, I forget to change it. Now it says one thing in one place and something somewhere else. But Ember kind of has this strong feeling that you should define your truth in JavaScript, and then the DOM is just a representation of that. And Ember handles when you change your truth, when you change your JavaScript objects, it flows down to the DOM via data binding for you. And then you can define methods on your objects, and then you can see all the magic comes from using things like set and get. So you can see, like, to get a property from an object, we call .get on it. There's also like an Ember.get that you could use with Pojos if you wanted to. And then to set a property, we use this.set, or you could use Ember.set if you're working with Pojos. So this is what creating an object would look like. You can see here that I'm just getting some values. If I set it, the value of full name changes for me. Same thing with the create. I can also supply some properties while I'm creating the object. Then you can see that overrode. By setting first name Bill, I don't have to set it later. It's already Bill. It doesn't take on Ray. So you can pass properties in as you're creating objects. So basically, almost everything in Ember is derived from this Ember object. So if you kind of get a good feel for it, for like how computed properties work, how properties and getting and setting, you work with that all over the place in all the different objects. So your controllers can have computed properties, your routes can have computed properties, your components can have computed properties. It all works through set get, so you kind of have to get used to using that. That might go away in the future as browsers start working with observables and stuff. And then there's a lot of stuff we didn't cover. There's like a whole, you can have observers and you can inherit from multiple. There's mix-ins, unknown properties. There's a lot of stuff you can do that makes this object model more powerful. But the basics is that you have properties, you use get set, and you can have computed properties that are derived from those values. All right, I actually need some water this time. All right, so let's build something. So this is like the kind of little app I'm going to use as an example as we go through things here. It's just, at my company, my boss thinks we should all get more exercise. And so he says, like, during work hours, we should be able to have 30 minutes of exercise a day. And so we just needed a place to log it. It's not fully complete yet, but we're going to use this idea for this app is the example code in the later slides. You can see, we have a dashboard. We can drill down and see all the activities. We can go see a profile. We can go back to dashboard. The back button works. I didn't have to do anything extra. That's fun. We can sign in. If we enter garbage data, we don't get to go forward. If I try to manually go to the dashboard without being signed in, I get sent to the sign in page. So even though it's a pretty trivial app, there's actually some stuff going on here. So let's dive in and see how we built it. So this is me the other day. I was looking for some tweets to put in the slides, and I was using Twitter, and their back button was broken. So what are your URLs? That's kind of one of the first things when I'm building a feature in a new Ember app is like, how am I going to define my URL structure? Because to Ember, that's really important. And this is really important for the internet. Imagine I'm in my Slack channel and I want to share that I just worked out with someone. Like, I want to send them a link to it. I need a way to give them a link. So even though we're building client-side apps, it's really important to have the URLs work. And that's a first-class citizen in Ember. It's actually kind of hard to build an app in Ember that breaks the back button or that's unlinkable. So this is what a router definition might look like. So you can see that we set the location. We create our router, set the location. Auto means it's going to work with either history or hash, depending on the browser support. Your server does have to support this. It has to know if I go to /workouts that I should still serve up the index.html and index.js. If you only want to support hash URLs, you can change this, but auto is usually pretty good. So in the router.map function, you can call, say, like this.route. And that's going to create a /signin URL. And if I call this.resource, it's going to do the same thing. I can optionally supply a path. The difference between route and resource is a route is normally like a thing, like a verb, sorry. And a resource is usually a noun. So like, I have a dashboard, I have a profile, I have workouts, but I would sign in, so it's a verb. You can also nest resources. So you can see this last one here. We have an activities, and then under activities, we would have activities/detail. So we can kind of see how this looks. So defining sign in and dashboard, it gives me those URLs. And those URLs, through Ember's conventions, map to the templates I'm going to use. So what templates get rendered on the screen. How am I doing on time? So for a nested route, so like /activities here, if I go to /activities, I'm going to get the activities template. But because I have this nested route definition with detail, if I just go to activities, Ember is going to provide me an index.hbs, so activities/index that's going to get rendered. But if I actually go to activities/23, which is my detail subroute, I'm going to get an activities/detail template. And you can kind of see through this diagram how those get nested. So if you have nested UI, you're going to have nested URLs to navigate down into that UI. And so this is basically how Ember decides what templates are going to get rendered for a URL. It's based on your route definitions. And so I lied a little bit because this isn't all that gets rendered. Everything gets wrapped in an application template that Ember provides for you. So if you have common UI elements like a nav bar or a footer, stuff like that, you can go ahead and put those in the application template. So for this URL, you would have an application template. Inside that would be a activities and then either an index or a detail template, depending on what URL you're actually hitting. So once we have defined our URLs, it's actually, all we have to do is do that, and we get a lot of value out of it. What's fun is you can actually jump into the Ember inspector, and it's going to suck on the screen. But we can go into our routes and see all of that definition right there. So Ember Inspector is a tool that you can download to play with your Ember applications and inspect them. One of the things that I like doing is going and looking at my routes. So you can see we have that dashboard route. And then it's going to tell me the template that's going to get rendered. So for dashboard, we have the dashboard template. It's going to tell me the URL. If I can't get it any wider. But it's also going to tell me like where it's going to look for routes controllers too. So the dashboard, it's going to get a dashboard route and a dashboard controller, and we'll get into those things in a second. So your URLs are defined in your router, and then those dictate what templates are going to get rendered. Some more water. Should just go back to the picture of my son, calm me down a little. All right, so now that we defined our URLs, let's figure out what we're going to put on the screen. So, and to do that, we're going to use Handlebars. It's a templating language that's a derivative of Mustache. It extends the Mustache. So essentially, it's just plain HTML. And then we can use these little curly, the mustaches, to put in properties into the HTML. So here in my H1 tag, I can just put the name property. I have pretty simple logic, so I have access to an if statement. So if they're admin, I can use the partial helper, which will just render another template right in line. So if the user is an admin, I can render the admin nav bar right there. If I don't, if the user is not an admin, then it's not going to get rendered. You also have like the negative if statement, basically, unless their user is active. Register that display this. So what's in this block? So they haven't done any activities. Get to work. And then we have some iteration structures. So we can do like an each. So for each workout in the controller, display workout activity name and workout duration. You can see that like the nested paths work. So my workout has an activity, and then my activity has a duration, and I don't have to. I can just use the dot notation to dive deeply into those objects. The each and actually the if statement too, the if helper, they have an else syntax. So if I have an empty array, I haven't done any workouts, I can it will display the HTML in that block instead. So if the user hasn't done anything or they have no workouts, then it's going to be just print nothing to show here, you lazy bum. So. You also have some other helpers that help you kind of put your app together. So like the link to. So if I need to navigate to another route, the syntax is pretty simple. The first argument is going to be like what shows up in the link tag. So this link would say profile. And then the second argument is the actual route I'm going to, so the profile. And then the last argument is any data that you want to pass to the model handler. So like in this case, I want to pass the user ID, and we'll get to that in a second. We also have some input helpers. So like we saw in the first example, the input value equals is just going to create like a text field for me. I can also do a checkbox. I can do a select. There's radio buttons, stuff like that. So basically, you have basic form helpers that bind to the data. I feel like I'm going way too fast. Slow down a little. All right, so another thing in templates is that you're going to start using a lot is components. And so what components are in Ember is Ember's approach at the custom element specification. So I think all the major frameworks are doing something like this now. So Ember calls them components. I think Angular calls them directives. Polymer, it's like what they do. Same thing, I think, with React a little bit, but slightly different. And what it allows you to do is create your own HTML tags that you can use in your application that are specific to your application. So on our dashboard, we have these kind of like avatar items. Like it's my avatar and my name and then some stuff I put inside of it. And we're going to use these all around the app. So it wouldn't be nice if we could simplify this a little bit. So what I can do is I can just create a template that's in the components namespace called avatar list item. And this is what that template's going to look like. It's going to wrap my Gravatar image. It's also going to give me like I can use some variables. It's going to have some properties in it that I can use. So in this case, I use the username to set the heading of my avatar list item. And then the yield helper says like, the user, when they call this tag, is going to be able to pass some content into it, just dump that content here. And so what this allows us to do, just with that one little bit of code, is create an avatar list item. I can pass in a username to it. So this is my custom tag. And then all this content is just going to get dumped in the yield statement. So it's like I created like my own like div that also puts a little image and a title. And I use this a bit because it's a lot nicer to just type this avatar list item, pass in a few properties to it, than to like remember the markup every time I want to create one of these little widgety things. So that's like a template only component. Components can also define behavior, or they can have basically a JavaScript class that backs them. So for these Gravatar images that I'm using for the avatar list item, you can actually define a component JavaScript class. So you can see here that I'm extending the Ember.component. I'm going to set some stuff on it. So like the tag name is going to say like, don't use a div here, which is the default. Use an image tag. There's some attribute bindings, which are going to be properties that I can pass in, which are then bound. They're going to be properties on the tag that gets rendered that bound to the properties on the component class. So for in this case, my image tag, I want to have a source and a width and a height. So I'm saying to Ember, like, source, width, and height, take these properties and keep them in sync with the properties on my class. So you can see here I give some heights for the defaults for the width and the height. But for my source, I'm actually going to use a computed property. And that computed property is going to take in the name, and it's going to run an MD5 hash on it, and it's going to return the URL from my actual Gravatar image. And then it's a computed property, so I set the key that it's dependent on to email. So anytime the email, which is something that we're going to pass in, we'll see that in a second, anytime that email is updated, the source tag on my image is going to update automatically for me. So I just define kind of how the data flows, and Ember keeps it all up to date for me. So this is how I would use that Gravatar image component. So it's just like a custom tag, and then I set properties on it like I would do on any tag in HTML. So I set the height here, I set the email to the email property, which is, I'm probably like iterating through a list of users or something. And then I can pass in a class too. And so that simplifies for me, my HTML markup a lot, because, these custom widgets and things, I can just create components for them. And that's been working out really well for us. So you can see how I passed in the email here, and that gets the email that I'm getting right here. So components are like, someone can probably say it better I am, like transcluded, isolated Angular directives. Basically, all the data that you're going to use inside of a component, you have to pass in explicitly. It has no access to the global scope. So I have to pass in that email. Like, even if there was an email like somewhere outside here, this email would, this get email would always be the one that I explicitly passed in. All right, should drink some water this time. All right, so now we have routes, we have URLs that work, and we know how to actually do some stuff with templates. But we don't have any dynamic data yet. We don't know what we're gonna loop through and use those properties or iterate over. And Ember has a very specific place to put that. It's in the route. So the route is responsible for kind of setting up the context for your template. It's where you would make a request to your server, where you would like grab some data from local storage. But it also has some other hooks that are pretty useful. So this is a very verbose route definition. So you can see the model hook here. So we're going to extend route, and then we're going to provide a model hook. This is doing a store.find workout, so we'll go over that in a second. But basically, it's returning some data. Before this happens, if we provide one, a before model hook is called, and afterwards an after model hook. What's nice is all these take promises, and it'll actually pause on them. So we know that when we render that template, all the async operations that actually happen to get that data are going to be done before we actually go and render the templates. And for example, in the before model, we might want to check if the user signed in. We might not want to go get data from the server if the user is not signed in. And so we can perform that check there. And then if they're not signed in, I kind of put it in there. We can transition to a different route. So we can keep people on the sign-in page if they're not signed in. The after model hook, say we're getting a list of workouts and the user only has one workout. We might redirect them to the page for that single workout. So we can do some work after we know the state of the model too. If anything goes wrong, you just provide an error on your route, and Ember will call this error handler for you, and so you can actually redirect to an error page or redirect to a retry. Something went wrong with your request. So the model kind of the route kind of handles your data flow in Ember. It's the place where you get the data. It's the place where you check that the person should be here. It's the place where when you get the data back from the server, you figure out if you need to do anything else depending on the state of that data. And what's great about this is that these hooks run, and they run correctly no matter how the person gets to your app. So whether they get in through a direct URL or they click around by links you generate, you know where these things are going to happen. You know where to put that code. Yeah, so I'm actually going to get to that right now. So for example, like you said, I created an authenticated route. And in here, I'm just extending route. And in my before model, I get the session. I call sign in on it, which returns a promise. If anything goes wrong on that, I catch it. And then I transition to the sign in route. So then in the dashboard route, which is, instead of extending from Ember's default route, I extend from my authenticated route. So any place where I want the user to sign in, I just use my authenticated route. And then I have that behavior on all those routes. I don't have to redo it every time. All right, so now we're going to make a little diversion into Ember data real quick. So Ember data is a persistence library that is optional. You don't have to use it. From that model hook, I could do a straight AJAX call, return a jQuery promise, or whatever persistence library I want to use. But Ember data really does simplify things a lot. So if you walk the happy path, if your API returns like a normal RESTful JSON response, you can basically define your models like we do here. So these are two different models. One is the user, one is the workout. And we're just going to extend the model object, which is a subclass of Ember object. We're going to give it some fields. We use these adders so that it knows what kind of properties they are. The default, like we're using under user, are just strings. But we can say, hey, this is going to be a number. This is going to be a date. We can set up relationships. So in this, like a workout belongs to a user and belongs to an activity. So we have those relationships. And then what happens is we can use this object called the store, which gets injected into all your routes and controllers. And I can call this.store.find. It's kind of probably a little bit hard to see, but above in the comments for each of these store calls, it kind of tells you the URL, the API endpoint that it's going to hit. So just calling find is going to just do a straight GET request on the resource. I can pass in an ID, and it's going to put it, workout/the ID. If I pass in a JavaScript POJO, it's going to convert those into query params and hit that against my server. And then if I do a create record, call save, it's going to do a post. If I already have a record and I call save, it's going to do a put to my API. And so that all works out of the box. You don't really have to do anything as long as your API is returning the right JSON. But there is places you can twiddle it. So for instance, here we're overriding the application adapter, which defines like how we're going to communicate with our server. So for our server, we want to put in some headers. So basically, this allows me to tell Ember, like, hey, we want to put these extra headers in all the API requests. If you don't provide this object, it's just going to provide no headers. So it's going to have some good default behavior, but you can always override things. Same thing with how the JSON from your API comes. If you need to modify that, you can create an object called a serializer, and then you can kind of change how Ember data is expecting to get your raw JSON back and convert it into these objects, these Ember data objects. So out of the box, it works fine as long as your API is returning the right JSON. But there's all these knobs, there's these like things you can turn underneath if your app isn't walking the happy path. But it's really good for the 80%. So with the Ember data set up right, like that's all I had to do because my API is returning the right data. The only thing I have to do in my dashboard route to make sure that A, the user signed in, and B, get all the workouts, is I have to extend my authenticated route, and in the model hook, I'm just going to return this.store.find workout. So I'm going to find all the workouts and pass those along to the template. Let's see how I am on time. All right, I'm actually going pretty fast. All right, so we define a resource. It tells us what template we're going to render. And then it also kind of gives us where to put the data access stuff, the setup, and that's in the route. There's another object that kind of comes in here, and that's the controller. So your templates have a context, and that's going to be the data returned by your model hook. But a lot of times there's going to be like display specific things or application state, or you want to handle like things that the user does. And that isn't something that you're going to put like back in your model on your server. You're going to want to handle it somewhere closer to where it's happening. So every template that gets rendered gets, by default, the way Ember works is it gets rendered with a controller that is a proxy. And we'll kind of see how that works in a second. So for example, like we have a blog post template here. So we're displaying the title, and then unless we're showing all, we display the teaser and a button to show all. But if we are showing all, then we display the body and a button to hide it, right? So that show all property, that isn't going to be something that's stored on our server for every user logged in. It's probably just something that's going to be local. And also the toggle show all, we need some place to put that. We need some place to flip the bit on that show all so that we can actually display the rest of the article to the user. And so this is all the type of stuff that you're going to do in a controller. And so for each URL that you define, you're going to get a template, a route, and a controller. And depending on the type of thing, so if it's an object, a single object that you're going to get an object controller. And if it's a list of things, you're going to get an array controller. And what these do is they proxy to the model, the content that gets set on the thing returned. I'm explaining this horribly. Essentially, this controller, its model is going to be what returns from that route. And so I can define fields on them, and those will be provided to the template. So for this controller, the show all property that I was using right here is the show all property on this controller. But here, where I'm asking for the title, that gets proxied back to the model that gets set on that controller. So what this allows me to do is it allows me to kind of decorate my model with some extra properties for presentation. And so back here in this toggle show all, that's an action. So when someone clicks that A link, it's going to send an action up. And then on your controller, you can also handle actions. So when someone clicks that button, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to toggle the property show all. So I'm going to handle that action there. And I feel like I didn't really explain that well, but if you have more questions later, come talk to me. This is an example of an array controller. So again, we can set our own properties. The array controller has some like kind of nifty stuff for sorting and stuff too, since it knows it's dealing with an array of things. To sort a collection of stuff differently, I can just set the sort properties on that controller, and I can tell it what to sort by. So like this is going to sort all the workouts for this controller by date. And I can set sort ascending, false, or true, depending on the direction I want the sort. I can also create computed properties that work on the collection. So for example, this long workouts is going to go through all the workouts. It's going to filter them by anything that's over 30 minutes, and it's going to return those. The cool thing is this will be recalculated anytime either someone, maybe they edit the duration on a workout or they add a new workout to the list. This computed property is going to kind of know that happens and update my UI accordingly. You can also, I didn't show one, but you can use computed properties on object controllers, obviously. So, the same thing that, like the full name, first, last name thing, you could do that on a object controller too. All right, so we're kind of winding down here. So for any of my routes I define, I get a template, I get a controller, and I get a route. And what I really like about this is certain things go in certain places. So like all my markup and my display stuff goes into my my templates. Kind of application state and handling user activities goes into my controller. And then kind of what data do I give to my templates, and like kind of making sure that that data is good and that the user's in the right place or they go someplace that they need to be goes into my route. And so I kind of have this, this mental model of like, I go to this place and I have these objects. And what I really like about Ember is that this kind of really scales for me really well. We've been using Ember for about 3 years now, or no, sorry, a year. And in that year, we've had 3 different versions of our application ship on Ember. With different versions of Ember, and our app just keeps growing. And what's great is that the code I wrote for that first ship with Ember is pretty much still there untouched. Because I'm adding new features. Those new features, they get their own route, they get their own controller, they get their own template. The code I wrote, a year ago is still the code that's working today. I didn't really have to go back and change things as my application grew. And I feel that Ember grows really well. So you can see just how, as you're in different pages of your app, you're just going to have different controllers, different routes, and different templates. And so that's all because of the conventions and the structure that Ember provides. And so those are the basic building blocks of your Ember app. There's a lot more to it. That's my talk. I feel like I sped really quickly through that. I didn't think I was going to have enough time. But so I can take questions now. There's actually like 2 Ember core people in the room, so they might have even better answer for questions than I would. We can take questions. Or I can kind of like go into some of the code that I wrote and kind of show like how a test might work or how some of the dependency injection stuff works. Good. Oops. So what would people rather do? Okay, sweet. All right, so this is going to be ugly. All right, so again, this is a basically the default structure that Ember AppKit is going to give you. sorry, Ember CLI. So it gives me a place right for my test right here. So I only kind of wrote one test for like the example, but what's fun about this is I'm running in like dev mode right here. So let me find it. So that's how the Ember application is running. So Ember comes with a Ember serve command. I can tell it a proxy where to go for my API. What this does when I'm running in development is it just lets me go to /tests. And oh my gosh, does it look horrible on this small screen. Like the Ember application part is like taking up all of it. I can hide it. Well, I don't want to try upgrading on conference Wi-Fi. That would be kind of bad. Yeah. All right. So basically, what I left in the app right now is a failing test. And so if we didn't really use the app too much, but if you notice when I'm using it, if I go and add a new activity, it goes to the bottom, which is not what I want. I want the activities to come to the top, right? And so let's go take a look at the test I wrote to kind of test that. So up here at the top is pretty much just straight like I need to import some stuff to make my test work, and then it's using QUnit by default. I think you can switch that out, but QUnit is kind of the happy path. And so I'm going to set up a module for this test. And basically in my setup, I'm going to start the app, which I imported up here. And then when I'm done with the test, I'm going to tear down. So I'm going to call app destroy. And then I can just create tests. So here's my test for this. So basically I'm going to expect 2 assertions. I'm going to visit the sign-in. I'm going to fill in some form stuff, and I'm going to click a button. And what you'll notice here is I'm not doing any like .venning or working with a lot of callbacks. What the Ember testing helpers do, like this visit and fill in, is they actually like register themselves and they wait for any asynchronous stuff to settle before they move on to the next thing. So you can see like visit, like sign in is going to possibly do an API request, and it's going to have to load a whole page. If I synchronously try to visit that and try to fill in a form, that form might not be there. But these asynchronous helpers allow me to just call them in a very synchronous manner, and it just works. So I can visit that, I can fill in this form, I can fill in this input, so input text, input password. I could use any jQuery selector there. These just seem like the easiest. I can click the button, and basically, and then when all that asynchronous stuff happens, I'm going to run this function, which is going to make sure I get to the right URL. So make sure that after I try to sign in, I'm redirected to the dashboard. And then I'm just going to grab the first item in that media list. So I'm just going to find all the media things on the page. This is kind of a hack. There's probably a better way to do this. But I'm just going to find the first one. So then I'm going to click the log workout button. I'm going to fill in that form. Again, I'm sort of cheating with the values here. I could actually find the select list on the page and then manually select the second one, but I'm just filling it in with 2 just to pick the second item. And then I'm going to click the submit button. And then after that happens, which this right now, because I'm not like mocking out my API or anything, it's actually communicating with the server I have running. After that happens, I'm going to make sure that the first item that I stashed away up here isn't equal to what the first item is right now. So it's probably not the most correct test. I wrote this really fast, like this morning. But it works for my case. So the test is failing. I expected to find this div, but I didn't get it. And so, or I expected not to find this div, and this is what I'm getting. So basically the bug that I left in is I'm not doing any sorting on my workouts in the controller. So if I go find that dashboard controller, I can uncomment that sort properties. And the test is going to rerun, and you can see that, yay, my test passed now. So that's just one simple test. If you go look at the guides, there's like, so that was an integration test. There's helpers to help you unit test pretty much all the things that we went over, like components, routes, all that stuff. The testing guide is really thorough on Ember. What I really like playing around with is, what's fun is that if you actually uncomment this destroy part of your test, you can actually see that it's just sitting there running that. So like if I uncomment that, this little in the corner, once that happens, you saw it like there was a form there and then it got filled in, and then, you know, if we actually scroll down here, like now that we fixed it, like that just got created on the server a few seconds ago. And so sometimes when I'm having bugs, I'll actually set breakpoints, and or I can actually like interact with my application right here. Like you can see, like I can actually play around with it. It's actually my real application running. So it's really fun for debugging because I can go into the real application. I can actually click around while the test is running. The other thing that's cool is because Ember has really, you know, made these asynchronous helpers easy to work with, is our QA guy is actually learning a bit of JavaScript, and his intro into JavaScript is writing our Ember tests. So he's actually writing our integration tests so that he can, because his job is basically to, when we submit a new feature, is to go in the URL and click around and make sure everything works. And so he's trying to automate that a little bit for himself, and he's using the Ember testing suite to do that. So how am I on time? All right, so questions? Yeah. Yeah, so our integration tests run against, so we don't ship, like we're not like software as a service company. We actually ship appliances. And so it's our test suite actually gets like loaded onto one of our appliances, and then the database gets set up, a fake database, and it just works with the real database. So we're basically trying to test the entire stack. We just have, our test right now actually just like kind of, I know it's bad practice, but like ignore the data that's already there. They kind of are all written in such a case where the extra data being there doesn't really bother the test. We probably could just like add like a API endpoint or something that that just gets put in development to like clean up the database in between test runs, and then we could just visit that URL on the setup or the teardown of every test. Something like, we're actually just starting to get into the front end testing of stuff. We unit test a lot of our server side code, but since we have a QA guy, the UI has always been like, hey dude, like go click buttons and see what works and what doesn't. So any other questions? All right. Do people want to see kind of the dependency injection stuff real quick, or do you have a question? Yep. Yep. So it definitely works. I'm not sure if it redirects you to the non-hash one. Does it just keep you in hash mode if you visit a hash? Okay. Yeah, that's not something that we've had to deal with. We have to support like really like older browsers, so we just stick with the hash in our application. So we don't care about like SEO or pretty URLs at all, because we're like, you know, we sell you a box that plays video servers on a TV channel, like videos on a TV channel. It's not something where we have to really worry about the URLs. So any other questions? Yeah, thank you. Yeah. And also, if you're, you know, you're embedding a little Ember app into a different page, you can kind of do none so that it doesn't take control of your the browser's URL. So. Cool. Anything else? Awesome. Thank you.